Hey there, let me jog your memory real quick. Do you remember Wish? Yeah, you don't want to remember it. I don't think I need to go into detail about this movie and what its whole deal was, but to TLDR quickly, it was a movie that was meant to celebrate 100 years of Walt Disney animation and its traditions. It came out, people hated it, most people hated it, and it ended up becoming another plaque on the wall of Disney misfires in recent memory. But the thing I remember the most from Wish wasn't even anything from the movie, which, wow, that really speaks to the quality of the movie, but more so in the lead up to it. There was this one interview that IGN did talking to the film's executive producer, Jennifer Lee, where she would go on to talk about the movie and typical movie stuff, but then came this choice quote from the interview when discussing why Wish wasn't animated in 2D. Basically saying while hand-drawn has the incredible hand of the artist, there's apparent limitations to what you can do on screen, and that CGI gave them boundless creative potential, and that they wanted to bring technology that can finally take away these limitations. Also saying later in the article that 2D had a lot of limitations when it came to character movements and characterization, which is something that I generally disagree with. And just like that, Twitter descended on this like moths to a flame. Hell, even I made a video talking about it, where I tried to dissect her point in the most good faith way possible. But even being far removed from that video, I still think the quote in hindsight was just dumb. Especially since this was the 100th anniversary, celebrating all of your films, many of which were 2D animated and also used technology to get around those limitations. Remember Deep Canvas? If she just said the business excuse for why Wish isn't 2D was because Disney basically has no major pipeline to make these movies on that scale anymore, I feel that would have gone over so much better than whatever this excuse was. And I think the outrage came from a believable place, being that we don't get a whole lot of theatrical 2D Western animated films anymore. I was lucky to grow up in the 2000s where I was exposed to both 3D and 2D films. Some of my earliest movie memories were watching Shrek, Madagascar, Chicken Little, but also films like Sinbad and Brother Bear, aka the Disney movie I always forget exists. You also can't forget about the SpongeBob movie, and I love the DVD and its bonus features. That was my jam back in the day. But it wasn't until the mid-2010s, being a teenager, where I realized, oh wait, I haven't seen a 2D movie in forever. Fun fact, did you know you can count all the theatrical, wide-release Western 2D animated films released in the 2010s on one hand? I'll show you. We have Winnie the Pooh, SpongeBob Out of Water, Teen Titans Go to the Movies, and My Little Pony the movie. Now surprisingly, I didn't know about this in the moment, but 3 out of the 4 of these films actually did well at the box office. At least relatively speaking, especially SpongeBob, which isn't surprising, but outside of that, none of these films even broke 100 million. And despite Winnie the Pooh grossing 50 million on a budget of 30 million, if we're going by the industry rule of a film having to make back twice its budget, the movie clearly didn't succeed in that ballpark, and Disney would eventually lay off a few animators and say that they don't have any plans to make another 2D film, at least for the foreseeable future. And it sucks, especially when we had movies like Rise of the TMNT the movie and Hilda and the Mountain King, which were both visual spectacles, and I would have killed to see them on the big screen. But those were Netflix exclusives because of contractual reasons. Now in fairness, Disney has been recently training 2D animators for various projects like the Once Upon a Studio sort, those anniversary Donald Duck sorts, and maybe even those How Not to Draw webisodes on Disney's YouTube channel. Those might not have been done by them, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were. Now all of these were great, but it still feels like we're just being teased. Like we could be making another 2D film in the future, but also maybe not, I don't know. But at the turn of the decade of the 2020s, a few other studios just got up and said, fine, we'll make 2D films ourselves. Paramount would announce they would be making a new Avatar The Last Airbender movie with Flying Bark Productions. Famous for their work on Rise of the TMNT and Moon Girl, Sony Pictures would announce an animated R-rated comedy by Gennady Tartakovsky. And lastly, Warner Bros. Would announce an at the time untitled Looney Tunes film. It actually felt like studios were wanting to try 2D again, but unfortunately Gennady's movie would lose a distributor and it currently is in limbo. Despite being fully complete and finished, the Avatar movie was delayed from October of this year to January of next year. And lastly, the Looney Tunes movie was dropped by the studio that birthed the IP into existence, and was released in countries last year before finally making to its country of origin this year. So yeah, these 2D films haven't been having the best of times. But I hope I can smooth all that over by saying, at least this movie's good. Like, yeah, it freaking slaps. First off, I can't believe that this is the first theatrically released Looney Tunes movie to be fully animated and focus exclusively on the Looney Tunes characters. or at least a small selection of them. It's kind of wild and a little depressing thinking that most of the time the Looney Tunes had space on the big screen was in these types of movies. While Space Jam can be credited for repopularizing the franchise for a 90s audience, or the commercials that the movie was based off actually, it unfortunately came at the cost of the authenticity of the characters. The Chuck Jones, aka the guy that made Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner and developed many of the other classic Looney Tunes cast, was famously not a fan of the movie. He actually hated it outright, pointing out stuff like Porky would never say he would wet himself, and that Bugs Bunny would take on the bad guys all by himself and not ask Michael Jordan for assistance. This inconsistent characterization was seemingly acknowledged by Joe Dante, the director of the spiritual successor of sorts to Space Jam, that being Looney Tunes Back in Action in 2004, even going as far to call it the anti-Space Jam, trying to correct a record and paying respect to the late Chuck Jones who passed away a few years prior. So as Back in Action was sort of an apology letter for Space Jam, The Day the Earth Blew Up feels like an apology letter for Space Jam 2, which was also pretty egregious in its interpretation of the cast. If you were looking for a respectful, lovingly crafted take on these characters, or at least this small selection of them, then it doesn't get better than this. Where this movie generally surprised me the most was in the relationship between Daffy and Porky, in that it has no right to be as well written as it is. While this isn't the first time in Looney Tunes history they've been paired together, I mean it's far from being the first time, I think this movie in particular is my favorite when it comes to them as a duo. In this story, both Daffy and Porky are basically adopted brothers, which really does ground their relationship in a much deeper way, rather than if they were just being friends, at least in my opinion. Porky is framed as being the big brother of the duo, being the responsible one who tries to keep everything in order while also trying to keep Daffy in line, as Daffy acts like the very hyperactive younger sibling. This version of him is very much based on Bob Clampett and Tex Avery's take on the character back in the 30s and 40s, which in turn inspired his character in the Looney Tunes cartoon series on HBO Max, which this movie acts as sort of a spiritual finale for since the director is the same person who worked on that show. Daffy is very reckless, sporadic, zany, and a little obtuse. But he doesn't act this way because he has a huge ego, or he's just selfish, or he's just an asshole like in later versions. It's because he was just naturally the troublemaker growing up. It's shown multiple times throughout the film that he generally cares about what's going on, and just wants to do the right thing. I mean, he's the one that discovers the alien conspiracy theory and tries to warn the entire world about it, but he's just a super over-the-top, loud, zany dude, which clashes with Porky's more put-together nature, and wanting to not be publicly embarrassed, especially in front of Petunia. Throughout the movie, Porky tries to consistently rein in Daffy not because he finds him annoying or to be a nuisance, at least not entirely, but because he genuinely cares about his well-being, and is worried about Daffy's continued outbursts and actions just making the situation worse for not only himself, but for others around them. It's completely done out of the care and love he has for him deep down, like the "I'm only doing this because I love you" instinct. The movie gets some real good mileage out of this character-centric conflict, and it generally had me like, wait, are they giving Looney Tunes characters development? Obviously, it's not an entirely new concept for the series, but still, I wasn't expecting them to go as far as they did. And you'd think a movie with 11 credited writers would result in a potential clashing of ideas and this movie being a cluttered mess. Wait, 11 writers? What? But no, this movie has an amazing pace. It keeps its head on its shoulders throughout the entire hour-and-a-half runtime, which is in part thanks to its very well-structured screenplay, which keeps a core focus on the Looney Tunes cast and how they react to the events around them. I also can't forget about Petunia, a Looney Tunes character that I honestly forget about from time to time, but I'm super happy with what this film does with her character. She's a scientist working at a gum factory who disapproves of the new flavor, so she decides to create her own flavor by any means necessary. She will put anything in her mouth. Sponges, gum under the seats, anything. She plays super well off Porky, which is obvious cause duh. But their relationship feels so sweet and palpable, it had me smiling so hard. I have to give a huge shout out to Candy Milo for voicing the character. She did a phenomenal job here. I should also quickly talk about the general premise of the movie. Basically, this alien, who reminds me of Cackletta from Mario Superstar Saga, has an evil plan which involves mind controlling the populace of Earth by using gum. But also while this is happening, Daffy and Porky need to repair the hole in the roof of their house or risk it being taken away from them. Said hole was caused by the alien and their mind control device. So both of them must find a job to pay for the damages, which whenever Daffy is involved with something, you know how well it's going to go down. They eventually meet Petunia, who offers them a job at the gum factory she works at. And then chaos, drama, and spectacle ensues from there. From the title alone, it's obvious this film takes heavy cues from science fiction classics, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and even a little bit of They Live, cause you know, chewing bubblegum, which is actually pretty clever. Even the design of the alien invader reminded me not only of Mario, but also the design of the aliens from 1996's Mars Attacks, minus the outdated CGI. So, this film is a loving conglomeration of some of sci-fi's greatest hits, mixing them with a Looney Tunes flavor, and out comes something that works well as not only as a sci-fi homage, but also a Looney Tunes one as well. Did I mention how insane it is that this movie exists? But anyway, I think it's time to move on to the general presentation, which deserves high marks across the board. The animation in this is fantastic. I honestly don't know what more I could say about it, because I think it speaks for itself. I honestly didn't know how much I missed his approach to animation until I saw this on the big screen. Now, don't get me wrong, CG animation and art has definitely proven itself over the past decades and is deserving of respect. Especially in the past few years with 3D moving more towards stylization than pure realism. But I think I speak for a lot of people in saying that nothing can come close to the appeal of the drawn line. Plain and simple. 2D just has that natural feel to it that's kind of hard to explain. Seeing this movie on the big screen took me back to the days of watching Curious George and Princess and the Frog in theaters. Back when I was a wee lad who had no idea the style was slowly being phased out. There's this one moment, a joke actually, in the movie involving a character who's basically just a painted asset. Like a still painted rendering of a character. And the only part of his body that actually moves is his eyes and his mouth. And for a majority of the time this character is on screen, they look like that until this one specific emotional moment, where this character becomes fully animated, and it's animated on ones, but it looks like it's rotoscoped, and I just busted out laughing. It's like that one joke in Smiling Friends with the random rotoscoped guy at the party, where the comedy comes from the sudden style shift. The movie in general is not afraid to throw in some mixed media here and there. There's a little bit of stop motion, this one montage where the art style becomes very Art Deco inspired, like very John Carlu, A.M. Cassandra type stuff. There's also some blending of CG objects with the 2D, and it doesn't look out of place. Like again, it's all good stuff. The art department did a great job all around. I have no complaints, giving it all praise. But going back to the comedy, in general the jokes in this movie hit consistent bullseyes almost every single time. It's been a bit since a movie made me laugh this consistently. There are a few jokes that lean more on the modern side of things, like there's a stimulus check joke, which this movie was written during COVID, so yeah, that explains that joke. There is of course a TikTok reference, but it's a very one and done sort of affair. And lastly, they reference a very specific meme from Space Jam 2. Not going to mention it, what it is, because I want to avoid spoilers, but I'll say this. Even though I mentally rolled my eyes at the reference, I think it was done in a way that wasn't intrusive and too on the nose. Like they don't just say the meme out loud, but it's done in a way where even if you don't get it, it won't take away from the experience. It's what a lot of writers, armchair writers on YouTube say is like the best way of doing reference humor, which I'll give the movie props for approaching it from that angle instead of just doing the thing. The rest of the comedy is what you expect from classic Looney Tunes, which goes to show that that good old Looney Tunes charm is timeless. Also, quick shout out to the voice cast. I mentioned Petunia's voice actor before, but I want to especially give mention to Eric Balza, since he basically voices half of the Looney Tunes cast at this point, and also does the voices for Porky and Daffy respectively. Just like Mel Blanc back in the day, it's a tradition at this point. Unsurprisingly, he does an amazing job making both characters feel very distinct, despite them being voiced by, you know, the same guy. It's what I like to call good voice acting. Now, I could easily make some sort of sly remark towards celebrity casting and the practice as a whole, but I'll hold back this time around, just this one time. I mean, the only big names on this film are arguably Peter MacNicol, who plays the alien antagonist, and Wayne Knight, who plays the mayor. Yeah, Dennis from Jurassic Park and Al from Toy Story. Typically, even in these small budget, small scale 2D films, they'll snag at least one big name. Sponge of the Water had Antonio Banderas and Matt Berry. My Little Pony had Liev Schreiber, Taye Diggs, and Zoe Saldana. Freaking Teen Titans Go had Lil Yachty and Nick Cage. I'm just gonna take a guess that some executive or producer on this film maybe either had some restraint or thought about what a celebrity cast would even really bring to this movie outside of publicity. Which leads me on to my final point and the big elephant in the room. This movie has been out in other countries for like 7 months. This isn't a new movie. It first came out in Germany and Switzerland back in August of last year. Then it got a screening back in October at a film festival in California, I think. Then it came out in Taiwan in November, and now us true American patriots are finally getting this in 2025. But the movie got a slight delay from late February to mid-March. Some of the trailers that played in theaters did show the corrected release date, but when I went to go see Dogman and the trailer for this movie played, it showed the old release date, not the new one. Which made me wonder if that has the potential to slightly hamper the box office prospects for this movie. Probably not, but going back to the point, this movie has been out for multiple months, even on digital storefronts in other countries. Meaning that if you really wanted to see this, whether through legal or other means, you've probably already seen this. Which, coupled with the fact that the distribution company for this film in the US, Ketchup Entertainment, is relatively a new company, at least 2011 is relatively new by those standards, I guess. And they mostly released movies I've never heard of in my life. I'll also take a guess the marketing budget for this was probably not as big either. So I'm a little skeptical on how well this movie is going to do over here. Especially since it pains me to say this, while Looney Tunes is an iconic franchise spanning generations, I don't think it's an in-demand IP. At least not currently speaking. It's not something like Marvel or DC or whatever popular shonen anime is currently dominating the discourse. Looney Tunes kinda is like Charlie Brown. A franchise that's recognizable to all sorts of demographics, but I think people aren't jumping out of their seats to see every new installment. It doesn't bring the hype is what I'm trying to say. But despite my slightly pessimistic tone, I want to be proven wrong. I want us to do well at the box office. Now, if this movie does well, will it signal the return of Western theatrical 2D animation? Honestly, I think the Avatar movie coming out next year has a better chance at doing that, at least being a big moneymaker given how relevant Avatar is in the current zeitgeist compared to Looney Tunes, especially with the Netflix series and the current in-development Twin Avatar show. But that doesn't mean we can't try. The budget for this was $15 million. If that Lord of the Rings anime movie could muster $20 million and that movie's budget was $30 million, then I think this film making at least its base budget back is possible. So yeah, go see this movie. Talk about it, bring your friends and family to see it, make Transformers 1 hype guy type accounts and flood the zone. Get Charlie to talk about it. That's like 500k tickets sold right there. I want this to do well not only to send Warner Brothers one giant middle finger for dropping this film, but also cause it's just a damn good movie that respects the legacy of the Looney Tunes. As said before, I'm astounded this movie was even able to exist, especially given its circumstances and the company it hailed from. This was the Looney Tunes project that got away, and it deserves to succeed. Even when this movie was available through legitimate and non-legitimate means, I purposefully didn't seek it out because I wanted to see the movie the way it was intended, on the big screen. And this movie did not disappoint. So go see this movie, or I'll be sending the Martians on you.